My name is Cheryl, and at 29 years old, I stood in my childhood bedroom, staring at the acceptance letter from Stanford Medical School that I'd just torn in half. My parents had just informed me that my younger sister Emma's latest crisis meant I needed to move back home permanently. The bitter irony, Emma was perfectly healthy, sprawled on my bed, smirking as she watched my dreams crumble. This was the moment I realized my entire life had been orchestrated for her benefit. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's also dealt with family manipulation? Please hit that like button if you believe in standing up for yourself, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of survival and triumph. Your support helps other people find these stories when they need them most. Now let me tell you how my own family tried to destroy my life, and how I finally fought back. Growing up in our sprawling colonial home in Greenwich, Connecticut, I learned early that there were two sets of rules in our family. One for me and one for my younger sister, Emma. While I was earning straight A's and working part-time jobs to save for college, Emma was being coddled and excused from every responsibility. My father, Mac, a successful real estate developer who built his empire from nothing, always said I was the responsible one, while Emma was fragile and needed protection. My mother, Clementine, who spent her days organizing charity galas and lunching at the country club, reinforced this narrative every single day. "Cheryl, you're so strong," she would say, adjusting her pearl necklace as she watched me do Emma's homework while she played video games. "Emma just doesn't have your resilience. We need to protect her." I was 11 years old and Emma was 8. The pattern was already set. The breaking point came when Emma was 15. She failed a biology test. Nothing unusual for someone who never studied, but this time she had a complete meltdown. She hyperventilated, threw things, and claimed she couldn't breathe. My parents rushed her to the emergency room where a doctor, probably tired of their dramatics, suggested she might have anxiety. That diagnosis became Emma's golden ticket to a life without consequences. Within a week, my parents had hired a team of specialists for Emma. A private therapist who came to the house 3 times a week, charging $500 per session. A learning specialist who basically did her homework for her. A life coach who was really just a personal assistant, making sure Emma never had to experience any discomfort. Meanwhile, I was told that my college fund would need to be adjusted to accommodate Emma's new needs. "You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" my father said, not even looking up from the contract he was signing for Emma's therapeutic horseback riding lessons. "Your sister needs this support. You're strong enough to make it on your own." I was 17, looking at college brochures for pre-med programs, and suddenly realizing I'd need to fund my own education. I escaped to California for college, working 3 jobs to pay for my undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley. I cleaned offices at night, tutored during the day, and worked weekends at a medical clinic. Every month, my parents would call with a new Emma emergency. She was having panic attacks. She couldn't handle her online classes. She needed me to come home. Each time I said I couldn't leave school, the crisis would mysteriously resolve itself within days. For 7 years, I maintained my distance. I completed my degree, worked in research labs, and built an impressive resume for medical school applications. I volunteer at free clinics, shadowed surgeons, and scored in the 97th percentile on the MCAT. My life was finally coming together. I had friends who actually cared about me, mentors who believed in my potential and a future that belonged to me alone. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was celebrating my acceptance to Stanford Medical School with my roommates. My phone rang, and my mother's hysterical voice filled my ear. "Cheryl, you need to come home immediately. Emma's had a complete breakdown. The doctors say she needs round-the-clock care from family. We've already called Stanford to defer your enrollment. I felt the blood drain from my face. You did what, Mom. You had no right to contact my school. But she was already sobbing about how Emma had tried to hurt herself, how the doctors said she needed her sister. How could I be so selfish as to put my career before family? My father took the phone, his voice cold and businesslike. Cheryl, if you don't come home by the end of the week, you can forget about your grandmother's inheritance. We've already told her about your selfishness. She's prepared to write you out of the will entirely. My grandmother Easter was 92 years old and worth approximately $30 million. She'd always promised that her grandchildren would be taken care of, that we'd each receive enough to pursue our dreams without worry. My parents knew that inheritance was my only hope of paying off the massive student loans I'd accumulated. They knew exactly which button to push, but the real betrayal came next. Oh, and Cheryl, my father added almost as an afterthought. Those student loans we've been helping you with. We actually put that money into Emma's medical fund instead. You currently owe $180,000 and the first payment is due next month. Unless, of course, you come home and help your sister. Then we might be able to work something out. I hung up the phone and sank to my knees. My roommates surrounded me, confused and concerned, but I couldn't speak. Everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd nurtured, it was all crumbling because my parents had been playing a long game I never saw coming. They'd trapped me as effectively as if they'd put chains around my wrists. I had no choice but to go home. The drive from California to Connecticut took 4 days, and with each mile I felt my future slipping away. I'd packed up my life, told my roommates I'd be back soon, and left the place where I'd finally felt free. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I barely recognized the house. They'd installed a wheelchair ramp, medical equipment was being delivered, and there was even a special van with a hydraulic lift parked in the garage. All for Emma's condition. I found Emma lounging by the pool, perfectly healthy, scrolling through her phone and sipping a margarita. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, and her face split into a satisfied grin. Welcome home, sis. Took you long enough. She stood up, stretching like a cat, not a trace of the breakdown my parents had described. Mom and Dad are inside preparing your schedule. Apparently, I need medication every 2 hours, special meals, and constant supervision. Hope you didn't have any plans for the next, forever. Inside, my parents had transformed our living room into some kind of medical command center. Charts on the walls, pill organizers covering the coffee table, and a detailed schedule of Emma's needs that would require round-the-clock attention. My mother hugged me briefly, then launched into explanations about Emma's medications, her triggers, her dietary requirements. My father simply handed me a contract. This ensures you'll provide adequate care for your sister. Sign it, and we'll start helping with your loans. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, I heard Emma on the phone with someone. Her voice carried through the thin walls, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Yeah, she totally bought it. You should see her face like a kicked puppy. I told you the Stanford thing would work. She's so predictable. A pause, then laughter. Of course I'm not sick, Deirdre. I haven't been sick a day in my life. But now I've got a full-time servant, and Mommy and Daddy are paying for everything, including that new Tesla I wanted. I crept to her door and peered through the crack. Emma was at her desk, and spread before her were documents that made my heart stop. Detailed diary entries about faking symptoms, printed emails between her and our parents planning my return, and most shocking of all, credit card statements in my name that I'd never seen before. She'd been stealing my identity for years, racking up debt while I struggled to pay for ramen in college. The next morning, I confronted my parents with what I'd heard and seen. Their response was textbook gaslighting. My mother's face went pale, then red with anger. Cheryl, I'm appalled. Your sister is suffering and you're making up these horrible stories. Perhaps you're the one who needs help. My father was even colder. You've always been jealous of Emma. She's sick and you can't handle not being the center of attention. I think you should see Dr. Kelvin. He's Emma's psychiatrist and he's agreed to evaluate you. Dr. Kelvin turned out to be a young, handsome man who looked at Emma like she hung the moon. During our evaluation, he spent most of the time asking leading questions about my resentment toward my sister and my delusions about her health. He prescribed me anxiety medication that I pretended to take but flushed down the toilet. I could see the trap closing around me, but I was already caught. My old life disappeared with shocking speed. My bank accounts, which had held my carefully saved money for medical school expenses, were suddenly empty. When I called the bank, they informed me that I'd apparently authorized transfers to Emma's accounts over the past 2 years. My credit score had plummeted from 760 to 420. Credit cards I'd never applied for were maxed out, all showing purchases in Connecticut while I was living in California. My best friend from high school, Deirdre, now worked as Emma's wellness companion, paid $60,000 a year by my parents to essentially be Emma's personal servant and spy. She reported my every move, every phone call, every attempt to contact the outside world. "It's nothing personal, Cheryl," she said one day, filing her nails while Emma got a massage. "But your parents pay really well and Emma's actually fun when you get to know her. You were always so serious, so boring." No offense. The community had been thoroughly poisoned against me. Emma had spent months before my return telling everyone that I'd abandoned the family, that I was selfish and cruel, that I only cared about money and status. She showed them fake texts where I said horrible things about our parents, about the town, about everyone who'd ever tried to help me. When I tried to tell people the truth, they looked at me with pity and disgust. Poor Cheryl, so bitter about her sick sister getting attention. My parents controlled everything. My car keys were taken for Emma's safety, in case I tried to leave during one of her episodes. My phone was replaced with a basic model that could only call family members and emergency services. My laptop was confiscated because Emma claimed the sound of typing triggered her anxiety. I was effectively a prisoner in a house where everyone else was free. Late one night, I found Emma in my father's study on a video call with someone. I crept closer and realized with horror that she was talking to my grandmother Easter, but she was pretending to be me. "Yes, Grandma," she said in a perfect imitation of my voice. "I'm so happy taking care of Emma. She really needs me. I don't want anything from the family except to help my sister. Maybe you should just leave everything to Emma since she's the one who really needs it." I burst into the room, but Emma quickly ended the call. She turned to me with that satisfied smirk I'd come to hate. "Oops, did I forget to mention Grandma's eyes aren't what they used to be? She can't really tell us apart on video. I've been having the most lovely conversations with her as you. She's so proud of how selfless you've become. So proud that she's decided to leave everything to me to make sure I'm taken care of." She stood up, stretching again. "You might want to get some sleep. Tomorrow I'm scheduled for a panic attack at 3 a.m. You'll need to drive me to the hospital." The 3 a.m. panic attack was just the beginning of Emma's escalating performances. She would time these episodes for maximum destruction always when I had managed to arrange a phone interview for a job or had finally gotten a few hours of sleep. The ambulance rides became routine with EMTs who clearly saw through the act but were obligated to respond. Emma would writhe and moan in the back while I sat there dead-eyed as she squeezed my hand hard enough to leave bruises. "Please don't leave me, Cheryl." She would whimper whenever anyone was watching. But the second we were alone, she'd drop the act and laugh. Did you see the nurse's face? She totally bought it. I should get an Oscar for this performance. Each hospital visit was meticulously documented by my parents, who used them as evidence of Emma's deteriorating condition and my essential role as her caregiver. The public humiliation campaign reached new heights when Emma staged an episode at the grocery store. I had managed to convince my parents to let me go shopping alone, a small freedom I'd fought for weeks to achieve. But Emma had followed me, and just as I was checking out, she burst through the doors, disheveled and crying. "Cheryl, how could you leave me? You know I can't be alone." She collapsed dramatically in the produce section, knocking over a display of apples. The store manager called an ambulance while shoppers filmed with their phones. By evening, the video was all over local social media with captions like, "Heartless woman abandons sick sister for groceries." And "Some people have no compassion." Emma had even created fake accounts to comment, each one more vicious than the last. My reputation in the community was systematically destroyed with surgical precision. Dr. Kelvin became a more frequent presence in our home, always arriving when I was exhausted or vulnerable. He would observe me with clinical detachment, making notes about my hostile behavior and resistance to caregiving duties. During one visit, I caught him and Emma kissing in the pool house. When I confronted them, he simply smiled. Emma's recovery requires a strong support system. Our relationship is therapeutic. He prescribed me stronger medication for my delusions, which Emma tried to slip into my food. The professional sabotage was perhaps the cruelest blow. Emma had accessed my email accounts and systematically destroyed every opportunity I had left. She sent messages to Stanford declaring that I was withdrawing due to mental health issues, attaching fabricated medical documents from Dr. Kelvin. She contacted my former professors, mentors, and colleagues with unhinged rants about conspiracies and paranoia, all written to sound exactly like me having a breakdown. Professor Martinez, who had written my strongest recommendation letter, called the house one day, asking to speak with me. Emma intercepted the call, sobbing about how I'd been institutionalized after attacking her. She begged him not to tell anyone to protect our family's privacy. By the time I found out about the call, weeks later, he had already informed Stanford's admissions committee about my supposed mental collapse. The inheritance situation grew more complex when Emma revealed the full extent of her manipulation. She had convinced our parents to give her power of attorney over grandmother Easter's affairs, claiming it was temporary while they dealt with my instability. Using this power, she had already transferred several properties into her own name and liquidated investment accounts. "It's for Grandma's protection," she explained sweetly to the lawyer, while I sat there unable to speak without sounding like the bitter, jealous sister they all believed me to be. Physical threats began subtly, but escalated quickly. Emma would leave sharp objects where I might step on them barefoot, claiming she'd dropped them accidentally. She mixed cleaning chemicals that created toxic fumes, then blamed my carelessness when I nearly passed out. Once, she loosened the railing on the stairs and I fell down half a flight. My parents installed cameras after that, not to protect me, but to monitor my behavior around their vulnerable daughter. The footage from these cameras was selectively edited by Emma to show only my reactions, never her provocations. A compilation video of me losing control was kept as insurance. "Just in case you get any ideas about leaving," Emma explained. "Wouldn't want the police to see how violent you can be." The video showed me screaming in frustration, throwing a pillow, slamming a door, all normal reactions to extreme abuse, but without context, I looked unhinged. Law enforcement became involved when Emma filed a false police report claiming I had pushed her down the stairs. She had carefully bruised herself practicing on her arms first to get the color just right. The officers who responded were sympathetic to her tears and suspicious of my protests. "Ma'am, we see this kind of thing a lot," one officer told me quietly. "Caregiver stress can make people do things they normally wouldn't. Maybe you should consider getting some help." The investigation was dropped when Emma magnanimously refused to press charges, playing the devoted sister who just wanted her family to heal. But the report remained on file, another piece of evidence in the narrative they were building. I was the unstable one, the dangerous one, the one who needed to be controlled for everyone's safety. Jimmy, my ex-boyfriend from high school, reached out through social media, saying he'd heard about my situation and wanted to help. I was so desperate for an ally that I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop during one of Emma's therapy sessions. He seemed genuinely concerned, asking about my plans, my feelings, my hopes for escape. I told him everything, crying into my cold latte as I finally had someone who seemed to understand. 2 days later, Jimmy showed up at our house with Emma on his arm, diamond ring glittering on her finger. "Surprise," Emma squealed. "We're engaged. Jimmy's been so wonderful helping me understand what you're going through. He's going to move in to help take care of me." The betrayal was complete when Jimmy handed my father a recording of our coffee shop conversation. "I'm concerned about Cheryl's mental state," he said gravely. "She seems to have some pretty serious delusions about Emma." The walls of my prison grew smaller after Jimmy moved in. He and Emma took the master suite, displacing my parents to the guest wing, but somehow that was fine with everyone. I was relegated to the smallest bedroom, the one that used to be a storage closet, with a camera mounted in the corner for my safety. The lock on my door only worked from the outside, and Emma had the only key besides my parents. My days became regimented torture. Wake at 5 to prepare Emma's special breakfast, which she would eat in bed while Jimmy rubbed her feet. Dispense medications every 2 hours, keeping detailed logs that Emma would later alter to show missed doses. Drive her to appointments she didn't need with specialists who were either paid off or fooled. Clean the house while she entertained friends, telling them how worried she was about my declining mental state. The financial fraud reached staggering proportions. Emma had been filing insurance claims for treatments she never received, therapies that existed only on paper. The bills showed hundreds of thousands of dollars for experimental procedures, private nursing care, and medical equipment that was never delivered. All of it was filed under my name and credentials using my forged signature and stolen medical license number from my volunteer work. One morning, I found Emma in the kitchen with Frankie, her college roommate, who now worked as Grandmother Easter's private nurse. They were dissolving pills into a smoothie, and Emma was explaining the dosage. "Not too much at once. We need her confused, not dead. At least not until all the paperwork is finalized." They were systematically poisoning my grandmother, keeping her docile and compliant while they stripped her assets. The FBI letter arrived on a Tuesday addressed to me regarding suspected healthcare fraud. My hands shook as I read about the investigation into fraudulent Medicare claims totaling over $800,000. Emma had been watching from the doorway, and she plucked the letter from my hands with a satisfied smile. "Oh dear, this looks serious. I suppose you'll need a good lawyer. Too bad you don't have any money for one." The false imprisonment became official when my parents filed for legal conservatorship over me. Dr. Kelvin provided testimony about my deteriorating mental state, complete with fabricated therapy notes and diagnoses. Emma sobbed on the stand about how she feared for her safety, but loved me too much to abandon me. The judge, faced with overwhelming evidence and no defense from me since I couldn't afford a lawyer, granted the petition. I was now legally unable to make any decisions about my own life. Emma was appointed as my conservator with full control over my medical care finances and living situation. She celebrated that night by showing me the suicide notes she'd been forging in my handwriting. "I've been practicing for months," she said proudly. "Your handwriting is tricky, but I think I've got it down. This one's my favorite, all about how guilty you feel for hurting me." The psychiatric hold came 3 days later. Emma had called emergency services claiming I'd tried to overdose on the medications I was supposedly taking. The empty pill bottles she showed them were convincing evidence, even though I'd been flushing those pills for months. The EMTs didn't want to hear that I was being framed. They just saw a woman under conservatorship with a history of violence and delusions. The psychiatric facility was a nightmare of fluorescent lights and locked doors. The intake psychiatrist, Dr. Wallace, seemed skeptical of the story, but was bound by the conservatorship order. "I have to hold you for 72 hours minimum," he explained. "Your sister has provided extensive documentation of your suicide attempts." I tried to explain, but every protest sounded like the ramblings of someone who belonged there. It was Ella who saved me. The elderly neighbor had been watching our house for months. Her retired private investigator instincts triggered by the strange patterns she observed. She visited me at the facility posing as a distant aunt and whispered urgently during our supervised meeting. "I know what they're doing to you. I've been documenting everything, but I need your help to get the evidence that will stick." She had noticed things others missed: the medical equipment deliveries that were immediately returned for refunds. The way Emma walked without any difficulty when she thought no one was watching. The frequent visits from known drug dealers to the back door. The late-night meetings between my parents and shady business associates. Ella had photographs, videos, and recordings, but she needed inside information to connect all the pieces. "There's a lawyer," she continued, slipping me a business card. "He's my nephew, specializes in conservatorship abuse. He's willing to take your case pro bono, but we need evidence of the financial fraud to get federal authorities involved. That's the only way to break through the local corruption." She squeezed my hand. "Hold on a little longer, dear. Justice is coming." Back at the house after my release, I found Emma packing boxes in my grandmother's room. "Oh, good, you're back," she said without looking up. "Grandma had a bad fall yesterday. She's in hospice now. The doctors say she only has weeks left. Tragic, really. At least she had time to sign the final papers, making me sole beneficiary." The cruelty was casual, delivered with the same tone she'd used to discuss the weather. That night, I made my decision. If I was going to save my grandmother and myself, I had to play their game better than they did. I started documenting everything with hidden cameras. Ella had provided tiny devices that looked like buttons or pen caps. I pretended to take my medications to gain their trust. I played the broken, defeated sister they wanted me to be while secretly building a case that would destroy them all. The transformation in my behavior was calculated to the smallest detail. I began taking the medications in front of Emma, or at least appearing to using sleight of hand learned from YouTube tutorials to palm the pills. I acted drowsy and compliant, letting my shoulders slump and my voice grow monotonous. Emma was delighted with my apparent submission, growing careless in her celebrations of victory. "She's finally broken," I heard her tell Jimmy one night, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "You should see her now, like a little robot. Takes her pills, does her chores, doesn't complain. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost." Their laughter made my skin crawl, but I remained still on my cot, breathing evenly, playing the part of the medicated prisoner. Ella proved to be a masterful strategist. She had created detailed timelines of every suspicious incident, cross-referenced with public records and financial documents she'd obtained through careful investigation. Her nephew attorney, David Sterling, had experience with elder abuse and conservatorship fraud cases. He worked nights building our case while I gathered evidence from inside the house. The prescription drug operation was more extensive than we'd initially realized. Dr. Kelvin had been writing prescriptions not just for Emma, but for dozens of fake patients, all using variations of my medical information. Emma and Jimmy were running a sophisticated pill mill selling opioids and anxiety medications to dealers who distributed them throughout New England. The profits were being laundered through my father's real estate business. I found the main stash hidden in the pool house inside equipment bags for sports Emma had never played. Thousands of pills and bottles with my name on them, medications I'd never been prescribed. Using Ella's button cameras, I documented everything, including the ledger where Emma tracked her sales. The numbers were staggering, nearly $50,000 a week in pure profit. The corruption in my father's business ran deeper than simple money laundering. Mac had been using his developments to hide drug labs, paying off inspectors and city officials to look the other way. I discovered this by accident when I overheard him on a conference call discussing the special ventilation requirements for a new building. The blueprints in his office showed hidden rooms and unusual chemical storage facilities, but it was the treatment of my grandmother that provided the smoking gun. Ella had managed to obtain Easter's medical records through a contact at the hospital. The tests showed massive levels of benzodiazepines and other sedatives in her system, far beyond any therapeutic dose. Combined with the video evidence of Frankie preparing the poisoned smoothies, we had proof of attempted murder. I managed to visit Grandmother Easter at the hospice, accompanied by Emma, who wanted to gloat. But while Emma stepped out to take a call, I whispered the truth to my grandmother. Her eyes, clouded by drugs, suddenly sharpened. "I knew," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been fighting to stay conscious. The lawyer, my real lawyer, he has documents. Hidden. Safe deposit box. Key is in my Bible, Psalms 23. Emma returned before I could learn more, but I had what I needed. That night, I snuck into my grandmother's room and found her Bible. Tucked inside the pages at Psalms was indeed a small key and a business card for attorney Harrison Webb. I photographed both and returned them to their hiding place, my heart racing at the possibility of hope. David Sterling contacted Harrison Webb, who revealed he'd been suspicious of the family's sudden interest in Easter's affairs. He had helped her create a secret trust that superseded any documents Emma had forced her to sign. But he needed proof of the coercion and diminished capacity to activate the trust's protective provisions. Our evidence would provide exactly that. The FBI had been building their own case, David informed us. My name had flagged their system not as a perpetrator, but as a potential victim of identity theft. They'd noticed the discrepancies, claims filed while I was verifiably in California, prescriptions written for conditions I didn't have. They were very interested in our evidence, especially the connections to the larger drug operation. We coordinated with Special Agent Jennifer Chen, who specialized in healthcare fraud. She was appalled by the scope of the crimes, but impressed by our documentation. "This is one of the most elaborate family fraud schemes I've seen," she told us during a clandestine meeting at Ella's house. "But with your evidence, we can take them all down." The plan was simple, but dangerous. I would wear a wire to a family dinner where Emma had planned to celebrate Grandmother Easter's impending death and the successful transfer of assets. She'd invited her co-conspirators, including Dr. Kelvin Frankie, and several others involved in the drug operation. They felt invincible, protected by their wall of lies and forged documents. I spent days preparing for the performance of my life. I practiced looking defeated, but not suspicious, broken, but not dangerous. Emma helped by increasing my medications, not knowing I had become expert at avoiding them. She wanted me docile for her victory party present as a trophy of her complete domination. The night arrived with a tension I could barely contain. FBI agents were positioned around the neighborhood waiting for the signal. I wore the wire under a loose sweater Emma had mockingly bought me with "World's Best Sister" printed on it. As guests arrived, each greeting felt like another nail in their coffins. They were all here, every person who had participated in destroying my life gathered to celebrate their crimes. The dinner party was a grotesque display of wealth stolen from my grandmother's lifetime of careful savings. Emma had hired caterers, decorated the house with flowers, and even had a cake shaped like a medicine bottle as a cruel joke. She wore one of grandmother's diamond necklaces, her fingers glittering with rings that belonged in our family vault. The other guests complimented her on her resilience, her strength in dealing with such a difficult situation. "I just want to thank everyone for being here." Emma began, raising a champagne glass. "It's been such a challenging time with Grandma's decline and Cheryl's mental health issues. But we've all pulled together as a family." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a devoted granddaughter. "I especially want to thank Dr. Kelvin for his support, both professional and personal." Dr. Kelvin stood, placing his hand on Emma's shoulder in a gesture that made my skin crawl. "It's been my pleasure to help this wonderful family through such trying times. Mental illness can tear families apart, but the Walkers have shown nothing but compassion for Cheryl's condition." He looked directly at me with cold eyes. "Even when she's been violent, delusional, and frankly dangerous." I kept my expression blank, the perfect medicated zombie they expected to see. Inside, my heart was pounding so hard I worried the wire would pick it up. Agent Chen had assured me the equipment was state-of-the-art, capable of capturing even whispered conversations. Every word these people spoke was being recorded, transmitted to the FBI van parked 3 blocks away. Jimmy proposed a toast to their engagement, announcing they'd set a date for next month. "We want to have the wedding before Easter passes," he said, using my grandmother's name with casual cruelty. "She would want to know Emma's taken care of." The group murmured approval, and I noticed Frankie checking her phone repeatedly, probably monitoring my grandmother's condition at the hospice. My father stood next, his usual commanding presence filling the room. "I want to address something directly," he said, his voice taking on the tone he used for business deals. "There have been questions about our family's finances, about the transitions we've been making. Let me be clear, everything we've done has been legal, documented, and necessary." He pulled out a folder of papers. "These conservatorship documents prove that Cheryl is incapable of managing her own affairs, let alone questioning ours. More importantly," my mother added, swaying slightly from champagne, "we've protected the family assets from Cheryl's creditors. Those fraudulent medical claims she filed, we've made sure they can't touch Emma's inheritance." She laughed a bitter sound. "Though I suppose the FBI will want their money from somewhere. Good thing Cheryl's name is on everything." This was it, the confession we needed. But Emma wasn't satisfied with implications. The champagne and success had made her bold, and she wanted to savor every detail of her victory. "Oh, Mom, stop being so careful. We're among friends here." She gestured around the table at her co-conspirators. "Everyone here knows exactly what we did. Frankie's been keeping Grandma sedated. Kelvin's been providing the prescriptions. Jimmy's been helping with distribution. Even Deirdre here has been invaluable in keeping tabs on our dear Cheryl." Deirdre giggled, raising her glass. "Remember when she tried to call that professor? I had his number redirected to my phone." She was so pathetic, begging him to believe her. I almost felt bad telling him she was in a psychiatric hospital. She turned to me with false sympathy. "Sorry, Cheryl, but Emma pays better than our friendship ever did." The confessions continued to flow with the wine. Dr. Kelvin bragged about his prescribing scheme, how he'd used my DEA number from my volunteer work to write thousands of illegal prescriptions. The beauty is, when it all comes crashing down, guess whose name is on every single script? Our catatonic friend here won't be practicing medicine from federal prison. Jimmy detailed the distribution network how they'd moved pills through my father's construction sites, using workers as unwitting mules. The money laundering process was explained with the pride of someone who thought they'd committed the perfect crime. Each revelation was more damning than the last, painting a picture of a conspiracy that reached into every corner of my life. Emma saved the worst for last. She pulled out a tablet and showed the table a video. It was me drugged and barely conscious, seemingly signing documents. "This is my masterpiece," she announced. Cheryl signing over power of attorney, admitting to the fraud, even confessing to elder abuse. Amazing what you can get someone to do when they're on the right combination of medications. The best part, she continued, her voice taking on a cruel edge, is that she actually believes she's been fighting back. Those pills she thinks she's been palming, I switched them for sugar pills weeks ago. The water bottles in her room dosed with sedatives. She's been drugging herself this entire time. The table erupted in laughter at this revelation. I felt my world tilt. Had I really been taking the drugs? Was my clarity an illusion? But then I remembered Ella's tests, the blood work that showed I was clean. Emma was lying, trying to break me one final time. I held on to that knowledge like a lifeline as the mockery continued around me. "I do have one concern," Frankie said suddenly. "Easter's tougher than we thought. She keeps fighting the sedatives, trying to talk to the nurses. I might have to increase the dose." She looked at Emma meaningfully. "Unless you want to speed up the timeline," Emma pretended to consider this, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "How long do the doctors give her?" Frankie shrugged. "Could be weeks, could be days. Depends on how aggressive we want to be." The casual discussion of my grandmother's murder finally broke through my practiced calm. My hands clenched in my lap and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. "Careful, Cheryl's showing signs of life," Jimmy observed, noticing my tension. "Maybe we need to adjust her dosage, too. Can't have her causing a scene at the wedding." He reached over and patted my hand condescendingly. "Don't worry, sister-in-law. We'll take good care of you. There's a lovely facility in Maine that specializes in long-term care for the mentally impaired. Very secure, very discreet." Oh, the doorbell rang, interrupting their plans for my future imprisonment. Emma frowned, checking her phone. "That's weird. Everyone's already here." She gestured to Deirdre. "Go see who it is. Probably another package delivery. I swear the wedding planning never ends." Deirdre left the dining room and we heard her open the front door. There was a moment of silence, then her voice high and frightened. "Emma, there are some people here who say they need to speak with everyone." Emma rolled her eyes, starting to stand. "If it's those Jehovah's Witnesses again." But it wasn't missionaries at the door. FBI agents flooded into the dining room, weapons drawn, badges displayed. "Nobody move, FBI, you're all under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, attempted murder, and violation of federal drug laws." Agent Chen entered last, her expression satisfied as she surveyed the stunned faces around the table. Emma's face went from confusion to rage to fear in the span of seconds. "This is a mistake, Cheryl's crazy. She's the one who did everything. Check the documents." She pointed at me frantically. "She's been recording us illegally. She's violating her conservatorship. Arrest her." "Actually," I said, standing for the first time all evening, my voice clear and strong, "I've been working with the FBI for weeks. Every confession you just made is admissible evidence recorded with full legal authority." I pulled off the sweater to show the wire. "And those documents you're so proud of, my grandmother's real lawyer has proof they were signed under duress." The room erupted in chaos. Dr. Kelvin tried to run but was tackled by an agent in the hallway. Frankie began crying, babbling about how Emma made her do it. Jimmy just sat there staring at me with something like respect. "Damn," he said as they cuffed him. "I actually thought you were broken." My parents tried to maintain their composure, my father immediately demanding his lawyer. But when Agent Chen began listing the charges, including RICO violations that could result in decades in prison, my mother broke down completely. "It was all Emma," she screamed. "She manipulated us. We just wanted to protect the family." Emma's mask finally slipped completely. She lunged at me, screaming obscenities, her perfectly manicured nails aimed at my eyes. The agents restrained her, but not before she managed to scratch my cheek. "You ruined everything," she shrieked. "I spent years setting this up. Years you were supposed to disappear. You were supposed to give up." "I did give up," I told her as they dragged her away. "I gave up believing you were my sister. I gave up hoping our parents would protect me. I gave up thinking I could save you from yourself. But I never gave up on justice." As they led everyone out in handcuffs, I stood in the sudden silence of our family home. The FBI agents were gathering evidence, photographing the prescription bottles, the forged documents, the cake shaped like a medicine bottle, that now seemed like evidence of their cruel intentions. Agent Chen approached me with a gentle smile. "You did great, Cheryl. Your testimony will put them away for a long time." The trials made national news. "Family fraud ring exposed by brave sister," ran in the New York Times. "Medical student fights back against elaborate identity theft scheme," headline The Washington Post. The story of a family so consumed by greed that they would destroy their own daughter captured public attention in a way that brought both support and scrutiny into my life. Emma was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. She maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming I had manipulated everyone. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video of her bragging about her crimes played particularly badly with the jury. Her final statement before sentencing was a rambling diatribe about how I'd stolen her life, completely lacking in self-awareness. My parents each received 10 years, though my mother would likely serve less due to a cooperation agreement. She testified against Emma, revealing even more crimes I hadn't known about, including a plan to have me permanently committed to a psychiatric facility in Eastern Europe. My father maintained his businessman's composure until the verdict was read, then seemed to age 20 years in an instant. Dr. Kelvin lost his medical license and was sentenced to 7 years for prescription fraud and conspiracy. The investigation revealed he'd been running similar schemes with other families, using his position to prey on vulnerable people. Jimmy got 5 years and immediately offered to testify against everyone else, true to his character as an opportunist. The other conspirators received various sentences, with Frankie getting 8 years for the attempted murder of my grandmother. Deirdre got 2 years probation and community service, breaking down completely when she realized the friend she'd betrayed had been the only honest person in the entire situation. She wrote me a letter from jail that I never opened. Grandmother Easter made a remarkable recovery once the poisoning stopped. The drugs cleared from her system, and while there was some permanent damage, her mind was sharp enough to understand what had happened. "I'm so sorry, Cheryl," she said during my first visit. "I should have seen what they were doing to you. I should have protected you. You were being poisoned, Grandma. None of this was your fault." I held her frail hand, feeling the strength that had helped her build a fortune from nothing. "Besides, you protected me in the end. That trust you set up saved everything." She smiled, looking more like herself than she had in years. "I always knew you were the strong one. The only one who inherited my spirit along with my money." The financial recovery was complex but ultimately successful. The government seized the drug money and fraudulent gains, but grandmother's legitimate fortune remained intact. True to her word, she revised her will to leave me everything, though I insisted on setting up charitable trusts for education and abuse survivors. I didn't need $30 million, but I did need to know it would help others escape situations like mine. Stanford Medical School not only reinstated my admission, but offered additional support, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances I'd survived. The dean herself called to apologize for believing the forged communications. "We should have verified with you directly," she said. "Your story has made us reevaluate our procedures for vulnerable students." I deferred admission for 1 year not because I had to, but because I chose to. The trauma of what I'd experienced couldn't be healed by immediately throwing myself into the rigorous demands of medical school. Instead, I traveled, wrote, and spoke at conferences about family fraud and conservatorship abuse. My story helped change laws in several states, making it harder for families to trap adult children in fraudulent conservatorships. Ella became more than my savior. She became my chosen family. We had dinner together every week, and she taught me the investigation skills that had saved my life. "Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who share your blood," she told me. "But survival makes you stronger than any birthright." Her nephew David and I also became close friends, united by our fight for justice. The house was sold, the proceeds going to pay restitution to the government and victims of the prescription drug scheme. I felt no nostalgia watching it go. Every room held memories of manipulation and cruelty. The new owners were a young family who planned to fill it with love and laughter, emotions that had been strangers in those walls for too long. I found an apartment in Boston, small, but mine, with windows that locked from the inside and neighbors who didn't report my every movement. The freedom to come and go, to eat when I wanted to sleep without fear, felt miraculous. I adopted a rescue cat who'd also survived abuse, and we healed together in the quiet safety of our space. Therapy was essential but difficult. Dr. Sarah Winters specialized in family trauma and medical abuse. She helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't my fault, that their choosing to hurt me said nothing about my worth. "You survived by becoming who they wanted you to be," she explained. "Now you get to discover who you really are." Writing became my outlet and eventually my mission. I started a blog about family fraud that grew into a book, then a foundation helping others escape similar situations. The emails poured in from people trapped by family members who used love as a weapon and blood as chains. Each story strengthened my resolve to keep speaking out. A year later, I finally walked through Stanford's gates as a medical student. My classmates were a decade younger, but life experience had given me perspectives they couldn't learn from textbooks. I specialized in psychiatry, determined to be the doctor who would recognize the signs others missed, who would ask the questions that might save someone like me. During my second year, I received a letter from Emma in prison. I stared at the envelope for hours before throwing it in the trash, unopened. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some family ties were meant to be severed. Forgiveness didn't require renewed contact with people who'd shown no remorse. My mother was released after serving 4 years. She sent messages through lawyers wanting to reconcile, claiming she'd been manipulated too. I responded only once through my own attorney. "I wish you peace and healing, but my journey doesn't include you." It was the kindest thing I could say to someone who'd chosen money over her daughter's life. The greatest lesson came slowly in quiet moments of freedom. Making my own breakfast without fear. Sleeping through the night without locked doors. Calling friends without supervision. These simple acts, stolen for so long, became daily affirmations of survival. I learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by those who stand beside you when standing becomes impossible. On graduation day from Stanford Medical School, I looked out at the audience. Ella was there, tears streaming down her face. David and his family cheered loudly. My therapy group waved signs. My chosen family filled an entire row, proof that love could be rebuilt on foundations of truth rather than manipulation. I thought about the girl who'd stood in her childhood bedroom watching her dreams torn in half. She couldn't have imagined this moment, couldn't have believed that destruction could lead to reconstruction. But survival had taught me that sometimes we have to lose everything false to find what's real. Dr. Cheryl Walker, they called. And I walked across that stage carrying not just my own dreams, but the hopes of everyone still trapped by family fraud. My story had begun with theft, lies, attempted murder, and profound betrayal. It continued with justice, healing, and the radical act of choosing myself over family mythology. To anyone watching who sees their own story in mine, document everything. Trust your instincts. Find your Ella. The blood of the covenant really is thicker than the water of the womb. And sometimes the family you're born into is just the starting point for finding the family you deserve. That childhood they stole from me, I couldn't get it back. But my future, that belonged entirely to me, built on foundations of truth, sustained by chosen family, and directed toward helping others escape their own prisons. They forced me to become my sister's caregiver, but I became my own savior instead. And that made all the difference. What would you do if your own family turned against you? Have you ever had to choose between blood relatives and your own survival? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family isn't always sacred, that sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve a life free from manipulation, even if that means leaving family behind. Stay strong, trust yourself, and never let anyone steal your dreams.